Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. House Democrats are likely to hold a vote on impeaching President Trump before the end of next week. Democrats are bringing forth 2 articles of impeachment against the president: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The charges are related to allegations the president withheld nearly $400 million in military aid and a White House meeting with Ukraine in exchange for an investigation into his political opponent, Joe Biden. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democratic committee chairs called it a solemn day in their announcement this morning. Here's Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler on why Democrats decided to take this step.
Elections are the cornerstone of democracy and are foundational to the rule of law. But the integrity of our next election is at risk from a president who has already sought foreign interference in the 2016 and 2020 elections and who consistently puts himself above country. That is why we must act now.
The White House is slamming Democrats' decision. In a statement, the White House press secretary said, quote, "The president will address these false charges in the Senate and expects to be fully exonerated because he did nothing wrong." Just an hour after unveiling those articles, Democrats reached a deal with the White House on one of the president's signature legislative goals. Speaker Pelosi signaled her support for the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. She praised her caucus for winning significant concessions from the White House in the deal. President Trump addressed both the impeachment inquiry and the USMCA before leaving for his rally in Pennsylvania on Tuesday evening.
The Republicans have stuck together. This is a witch hunt. It's a terrible thing. But even the Democrats, they couldn't find very much because they put up 2 articles that, frankly, are very weak, and they're very weak. Also, they approved today, of all days, we've been waiting a year, and they approved today the USMCA, and I call that the silver lining to impeachment, because without the impeachment, they would have never approved it, in my opinion.
Let's bring in Anita Kumar and Kim Wehle. Anita is an associate editor and White House correspondent for Politico, and Kim is a CBS News legal analyst. Welcome to both of you. Kim, I'd like to start with you. Noticeably, these articles of impeachment do not make any mention of Robert Mueller or the 2016 investigation into election interference, nor was there a charge of bribery. Looking at this, Kim, within the framework of the Constitution, what do you make of the Democrats' decision to pursue abuse of power and obstruction of Congress?
I think those are the 2 strongest charges. Factually, there really isn't a counter narrative to either of them. That is, the defense to the abuse of power charge, the quid pro quo, tends to be false, essentially. A narrative that has to do with Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election, which has no basis, in fact, to sort of give the president an excuse or cover for making a request of Mr. Zelensky to announce investigations into Joe Biden. With respect to obstruction of Congress, this is unprecedented. This president has taken the position not that he has legitimate executive privilege reasons for withholding pieces of information, but has had essentially blanket immunity. That's his position for anyone who's worked for him. And that really is undermined by 2 Supreme Court decisions that directed the last 2 presidents that went through impeachment processes to personally comply with subpoenas. So if the president is not somehow immune, how can people who work for him? So I think that those 2 are quite strong. With respect to bribery, the issue there had to do with really the federal criminal statute. The Supreme Court in 2016 issued a decision that if this were an actual indictment in a criminal process, the president would have some defenses. So I think the Democrats might have just not wanted to wade into that legal ambiguity, even though they have an argument that criminal law doesn't apply to impeachment. With respect to the Mueller report, I think this is probably political. The American public has moved on. It's really in the rearview mirror. And of course, Robert Mueller decided not to indict for obstruction of justice. So the president would have that defense. Listen, a criminal prosecutor, for whatever reason, decided there was not sufficient charges or that he could not criminally prosecute under the DOJ memo. Whatever the reason, that ship sort of has sailed. So I think the 2 charges that are going forward forward really are the strongest, and we'll just have to see whether there is any appetite in the Senate for tolerating them from the Republican side.
Meantime, Anita, Republican Chairwoman Ronna Romney McDaniel tweeted a picture of 7 members of Congress, all of whom are from overwhelmingly blue states. And she wrote, those pushing for impeachment, quote, couldn't be more out of touch with most Americans if they tried. Is that a strategy the White House is embracing?
Well, let's be clear, the White House is embracing about 12 strategies. They have a lot of different messages. But yes, I think that really is a message that you're seeing from Republicans. You saw last week when the constitutional law professors were testifying, some Republicans were very critical of them from being from Harvard and from places that they consider elite and not just sort of regular America. But that's one of the things that they're saying, is that there are people in Washington, there are people in certain areas, pockets of the country that care about this. But when you're out in the country talking to voters, talking to people in other states, this isn't something that's on their radar. They're trying to figure out, their groceries and their schools and their taxes and those sorts of things, and they're not paying attention to this. This is just certain people in Washington, elites, that sort of thing. So it definitely is one of the messages coming from the White House and from House Republicans.
So, Anita, in an interview with our Catherine Herridge, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham gave his perspective on how Republicans will vote in a Senate trial and whether Republicans will call witnesses. Let's listen to some of that.
I'm in the camp of that this is not good for the country, it's not good for the Senate, it's doing a lot of damage. We know what's going to happen. The sooner you get it over with, the better. There's not going to be any votes on the Republican side to impeach the president. Let the House managers make their case based on the trial record. Let the president argue his point of view, then let's vote, is my position. Now, some people want to call Hunter Biden, some people want to call Joe Biden, some people want to call Mike Pence, some people want to call Pompeo. You know what I want to do? I want to get this behind us so we can get on dealing with things that really matter to the American people. I want to end this based on the record they assembled in the House. I understand there's a lot of emotion here. The sooner we can get this behind us, the better.
So, Anita, Graham also said he would not call House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff. Do you expect the White House to push for witnesses in the Senate trial?
I think that the president himself is pushing for those witnesses. He's talking, obviously he's tweeting about it, but he's also talking about it. His White House counsel has been on Capitol Hill just this last week having lunch with Senate Republicans. So I do think that the president and the White House are pushing for other people. But in the end, I believe that they are leaving it up to the Senate Majority Leader. He obviously knows the Senate rules and how that would work and what is the best thing to be done. I think that there are some people saying what Senator Graham is saying right there, which is we expect to know what the result is, which is he's probably going to be not removed from office. Probably Republicans will not break with the president. And so what is the point of dragging it on? It's, a lot of people are saying it is time to just quickly get through it. And if you have a lot of witnesses, perhaps you won't get through it as quickly. So there are different opinions on that. And I think in the end that the White House will look at what the Senate expertise is and what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has to say about that.
So, Kim, last week we heard the Republicans' legal witness and our colleague Jonathan Turley argue Democrats should have spent more time in the courts fighting to get more firsthand witnesses. Now, Chairman Schiff made a rebuttal to that argument today. Let's listen to that.
It has taken us 8 months to get a lower court ruling that Don McGahn has no absolute right to defy Congress. 8 months for one court decision. If it takes us another 8 months to get a second court or maybe a Supreme Court decision, people need to understand that is not the end of the process. It comes back to us and we ask questions because he no longer has absolute immunity, and then he claims something else, that his answers are privileged and we have to go back to court for another 8 or 16 months. The argument, why don't you just wait, amounts to this. Why don't you just let him cheat in one more election?
So, Kim, what do you make of Schiff's argument?
I don't necessarily agree with the premise that courts can't move quickly. It doesn't look like this Congress has made efforts to basically get the courts to step in through expedited reviews, through preliminary injunctions, for example, and get this on the docket and get this resolved. I think that it could have been beneficial for the Democrats and, frankly, for the Constitution to have two branches of government stand up on behalf of the rule of law. That is, I'm quite confident the courts would say, as I indicated earlier, listen, there is no such thing as blanket immunity from responding to congressional subpoenas for the president. So there is no such thing as blanket immunity for people who work for the president. We now have two courts, one from 2008 involving a subpoena to Harriet Miers, and then one recently, federal courts that have said that. So I'm not so sure I agree with that, in part because what's at stake in this moment is really the legitimacy of the separation of powers. I understand people have a lot of concerns in their personal lives, but if we have a system of government where the office of the presidency really becomes above the law, where there's not meaningful accountability for taking actions that appear to not be in any, I think any testimony supports the notion that these actions taken by President Trump were for the benefit of the American public. They were the benefit for himself. So if that's the new normal, that's quite serious for democracy. And I would have liked to see I'm also a constitutional scholar, I would have liked to see the Democrats get the federal judiciary, two branches of government, behind shoring up an accountable government under the United States Constitution. As we just heard from my colleague, it's going to probably be an acquittal in the Senate. And then where are we in terms of an accountable democracy with co-equal branches of government? We'll just have to see how that turns out for our children and grandchildren going forward after this episode.
All right, Kim Wehle in Washington. Kim, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to bring in Jennifer Haberkorn. She's a congressional reporter for the Los Angeles Times. Jennifer, let's turn to the USMCA. Here was some of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's reaction to that deal earlier today.
There is no question, of course, that this trade agreement is much better than NAFTA. But in terms of our work here, it is infinitely better than what was initially proposed by the administration.
So, Jennifer, why are Democrats praising a deal the president wanted so badly?
Yeah, you know, it was pretty ironic this morning, right after announcing the impeachment moving forward. They announced that they agreed to President Trump's, biggest legislative accomplishment of this year is getting this USMCA, the new NAFTA, passed. Democrats feel like they really need to show their constituents that they can come to Washington and do something other than impeach the president. This divided government means there hasn't been a lot of legislation going to President Trump's desk. But this is something really important to Democrats to show that that they can work with the president when they agree with him on policy.
Well, Anita, some Republican senators have signaled they will vote for this deal, but others, such as Republican Pat Toomey, expressed hesitance. Let's play his remarks.
Well, it's clearly moved way to the left, which is why you had a celebratory press conference by all the Democratic leadership in the House. I will say, in fairness to Bob Lighthizer, there was a lot of discussion early on. But in the last few weeks, the discussion certainly didn't include me. And I don't know what other Republican senators it did include, but it seemed to be just a one-way direction in the direction of the Democrats and their many demands.
So, Anita, does the White House believe it has enough support in the Senate to get the deal done?
I think the White House knows that there are some Republicans that it needs to win over, and that's why you saw Bob Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, starting what some people are calling a charm offensive, starting to talk to Republicans and convince them this is the right way to go. But I do feel that in talking to various people that are close to the White House, Republicans that are close to the White House, that they do feel confident this will pass. And the reason being is exactly sort of the opposite of what Jennifer said. Democrats need a win. win. They need to show that they're doing more than impeachment. But the president also needs to show that he's accomplishing something as he's getting out and running for re-election. And so it's been very difficult with divided government. It's been very difficult with impeachment. And, you know, both parties, both sides were hoping for this so they can go back home and show that they are accomplishing something. So I think that end result, the Republicans will be looking at that and really realizing that they need to probably vote for this.
Well, Jennifer, today in the LA Times, you put this whole day of impeachment and the trade deal into context, calling it one of the president's, quote, worst and best days. You wrote, quote, for voters, the dueling announcements offered a glimpse into an alternate reality, a real-time contrast between the embattled presidency that Trump now has and the one that might have been, in which a political outsider cuts across party lines to deliver a trade deal. So, Jennifer, whom do you see benefiting from impeachment and the trade deal in the long run?
Well, we probably won't know the answer for that for another year when the 2020 election takes place. But for now, I mean, the president's campaign, at least, is saying that both of these is a winner for him. I mean, impeachment, he can, run in 2020, telling voters that this Democratic House is trying to throw him out. He's likely to be acquitted in the Senate, and he'll be able to run on that acquittal. And he's going to run on USMCA. Democrats, too, are hoping that this works out well for them. I mean, they're moderate Democrats really, really want to run on USMCA. They want to run on that legislative accomplishment. So for now, everyone's trying to claim a win. Of course, that can't always be the case. And at one point, probably next November, we're going to know who was the winner. But to be sure, both of these things that happened today, both impeachment and the trade deal, are likely to be divisive issues in the 2020 election.
Well, Anita, we've just learned details about the president's meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. According to the White House, the president, quote, warned against any Russian attempts to interfere in the U.S. election. Is this something the president has done before in this type of setting?
Well, we've actually seen the opposite. I was there at the United Nations when the president was meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and kind of made a joke about, hey, people want me to say to you, don't interfere. So don't interfere with the elections. Right. This has been the criticism for a couple of years now, 3 years really, that he has not been strong enough to Russia. We haven't seen that publicly in press conferences and statements and meetings where the media is let in and there. So, we don't know exactly what's said behind closed doors, but definitely the president, President Trump, has not been strong enough. A lot of Democrats think that, but a lot of Republicans think that too, that this is an issue that he needs to be strong on. They interfered in the last election. We don't want them to interfere now, and so he needs to be stronger on that. We just don't know what exactly he said, but we know what he said in the past has not been enough for members of both parties.
Right, and it's important to note, as you just underscored there, this is essentially the White House's take on what took place. There were not reporters there in the room to witness that
That's
exchange.
Exactly right.
Yeah. All right. Anita Kumar and Jennifer Haberkorn, thank you both very much.
Thank you.